I would say there are three aspects to the history of the Oxford movement that it would be worth us spending a little bit of time unpacking. And those are the creedal aspect, the holiness aspect, and then the liturgical or worship aspect. And that means going to the creedal, right? The Oxford movement began at the start of the 19th century at a time when the creed, I guess, hadn't really been unpacked as fully as perhaps it should have been. This is the period of the Enlightenment. It's certainly the period of the evangelical renewal, which is really good and is bringing a lot of life back to Christianity in England. But in the eyes of the Oxford movement founders, there wasn't really enough attention being paid to the creed and its truth. The evangelical view, they thought, was maybe a bit too skewed towards the Bible, a bit too skewed towards Christ's atonement to the expense of all the other doctrines. And so if we're looking at the creedal aspect of the Oxford movement, I think they wanted to draw attention to the end of the Nicene Creed with the idea that we're part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And the we there is we, the Church of England. But I think, speaking to a fellow Episcopalian, we could expand that to all members of the Anglican Communion. All churches within the Anglican family are part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And of course, in 1800, most people would in England have not thought of themselves as Catholic. So although they would say that creed, I'm not sure that they entirely got what it meant to be Catholic. And so the Oxford movement is going to emphasize that what it means to be Catholic is to be rooted in this in this 1900-year tradition of beginning with the birth of Christ and Christ's ministry and Christ's death and resurrection again, and this giving birth to a church that would grow from Christ's apostles out to cover the length and breadth of the globe, but also span all time and ultimately eternity. So that Catholic notion that is both to do with space across the globe and time through linear time into eternity was something that they wanted to stress. And again, that may not sound particularly challenging to you and to me, but in the context of most people in 1800 in Britain who saw themselves as Protestant, this meant, oh my gosh, what are you saying? Like, even those people over there in Italy who follow the Pope, they're part of a church, Catholic through space and through time. And so quite soon thereafter, the Oxford movement starts getting into trouble for appearing a bit too, let's say, large C Catholic, a bit too Roman Catholic, when actually what they were trying to stress was the small c Catholic that we find in the Creed, one holy Catholic and Apostolic. So that's just one aspect, Chris. I could talk about the other two if you're not too bored. So the second aspect is their holiness. And again, remember the context. This is in the early 1800s in a Britain that is very much a Protestant and evangelical, increasingly, milieu that they find themselves in. And interestingly, the evangelical movement had very much brought back the notion of holiness and the desire to, give your life over to God and show that every aspect of your life was God's work through you of justification and sanctification. And the Oxford movement took that same holiness idea, but in a more small c Catholic direction, wanting to bring back from the past centuries of Christianity some of the aspects of what it meant to be holy, such as fasting, denying yourself in Lent, praying lots. The Oxford movement was big into prayer, and bringing back traditions of prayer from both the Anglican past, people like Lancelot Andrewes, but also from the ancient, or as we call it, patristic past, the church fathers. So they spent a lot of time translating early church holy men and women. So there's that aspect of embodied holiness that is very important to them. And again, that's not in conflict, funnily enough, with the evangelical tradition at the same time. So one historian has actually argued that the Oxford movement and the evangelical movement are two parts, two sides of the same coin, if you like, of retrieving holiness for Anglicanism. Then finally, the third aspect, what I call the liturgical aspect or the worship dimension. Often that's the one that people think of first when they think about the Oxford movement. But actually that was a latter stage in the Oxford movement's development through a group of people who were affiliated with the Oxford movement, but none of the Oxford movement leaders would have described themselves as ritualists. And this is to say they wanted to bring back the rituals of the ancient church to practicing Anglicanism. And it might surprise our viewers today to know that at the start of the 19th century, if you were to walk into a Church of England church or an Episcopal church, you wouldn't see a cross anywhere in the church because that was seen as idolatrous according to the Ten Commandments. You wouldn't have seen an altar either pushed up against the wall or in the nave, as many Episcopal churches have today, unless it was a medieval church. But that altar would not be used terribly often. And certainly the idea that the Eucharist was the central act of worship was not the case. It was a very rare thing to have a Eucharist. And therefore all the stuff that Episcopalians at least tend to associate with Eucharists, like wearing special clothing, something we call vestments, or putting special coverings on the altar that change color according to the season. None of this was thought of at the start of the 1800s. And it was only through the Oxford movement's teaching about the importance and centrality of Eucharist that some of these ideas started to get going, and they were sort of picked up and run with by this crowd of people we call the ritualists.